Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to today's webinar titled Strategies to Thrive Amid Trade Turbulence that we are hosting with our friends at e2open. My name is Nick Persin. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships here at SONAR, and I'm joined by Andy Simmons and Mike Baduendistel. Before I kick it over to them, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. There is a chat box for you to ask any questions for the speakers on your right-hand side. So feel free to ask those questions, type those questions in, and we will address as many of those as we can throughout the webinar. And if you are running into any technical issues, please use the help box, and one of our team members will help you address the issues that you're currently having. Also, as a reminder, you will have this the recording of this webinar available for 24 hours post the conclusion of this webinar today for you to review. And with that, I'd like to introduce Andy Simmons from e2open and Mike Baduendistel. Andy?
Thank you, Nick. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Again, my name is Andy Simmons. I am the Senior Director of Solutions Consulting for Global Trade at e2open. And I have worked in the area of global trade for over 30 years now. And I am based in Lake Forest, Illinois. e2open provides the complete end-to-end supply chain solution for our clients, from demand all the way through supply, with global trade being the keystone of that arch, in my opinion, that connects supply and demand together. So thank you for joining us today.
And I'm Mike Baduendistel. I appreciate everyone joining me. I'm head of Intermodal Ocean and Drayage at SONAR. Stuck with the SONAR side after FreightWaves, the media business, and SONAR split. I help existing customers with all their data needs on those sectors, help sales prospect for new clients as well, but really spend a lot of my time putting context around the data that we have in the FreightWaves SONAR product. Came from the world of finance, was a sell-side stock analyst for a long time at Stifel, so I spend a lot of time with those customers as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Andy. So let's kick it off here. Mike, first question for you is, what is your outlook for the ocean shipping market this year, and what do you see as the biggest areas of uncertainty?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a really interesting year for ocean shipping. I think there's a lot of areas of uncertainty. I think so the general thought is that rates, are at an elevated level and they'll come down throughout the year. And I think there's a number of different factors that could help drive that, some of which just are kind of more areas of uncertainty. But like the Red Sea situation is one of the things that, I point to and say, well, okay, the Red Sea has been closed for over a year, let's call it a year and a quarter, with the exception of certain local services, maybe certain ones that have escorts from military, from CMA, CGM. And if that were to fully open, that would really increase capacity quite significantly overall, particularly for the China to European lane. So that's something to watch for. I've seen estimates that could increase ocean capacity by 8 to 10%. Another thing to watch for on the supply side is the container ship building that's coming into the industry. And that's something that I've seen estimates there that on a net basis that could increase capacity 8% this year, 6% next year. So you have a couple of different factors that could add capacity into the market to reduce to potentially reduce rates. So those are things to watch. On the demand side, it does seem like we've had a pull forward in imports from Asia to the U.S. for the past several months. I mean, some companies started doing this as soon as Trump won the election. Some seem like they even did it before in sort of anticipation of Trump, and therefore in anticipation of tariffs. Some were doing it, in anticipation of potential labor disruption with the ILA. Really those West Coast ports have been breaking records on imports about 15% higher than what would be typical for those respective months, the past several months. And that's maybe starting to come down a little bit. I have seen in the past month or so, the spot rates from the ocean from Asia to the United States have come down about 30% in the Freightos data that we have in SONAR. And so it sort of suggests that maybe we're getting a little bit past the pull forward related to the tariffs. So there's uncertainty in demand. The tariffs could reduce overall ocean demand. There's also uncertainty with what's going to happen with the de minimis situation, which really has had primarily a major impact on the air freight sector. Some of that, what's moving now by air freight, may go ocean or just may be produced and stored in local, U.S. warehouses. So there's a lot of factors there. But I think on balance, it looks like the supply in the ocean industry is going to grow faster than demand. So it would expect that to put pressure on rates.
Awesome insight. Thanks, Mike. That was super helpful. Andy, I want to kick it over to you now. So kind of piggybacking off what Mike said and kind of like leveraging your expertise in the global trade landscape. So what's the undergoing significant changes with the new tariffs and evolving regulations and how that's affecting the global trade landscape? How can businesses stay compliant amid these shifts? And what role does e2open's trade content library play in ensuring compliance? And what other resources should businesses focus to stay ahead?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, well, that's really sums it up, what we have to do. And our role as trade compliance people, I think, can be summed up in 2 words, which is stay informed. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to really consume news and information from any source we can get, whether it's the mainstream media, business-specific publications. There's a whole wealth of information out there for us to study and to analyze, whether it's the CBP websites, various trade groups, publications, talking to your colleagues. There's so many ways that we can get information and stay informed to help our companies be compliant. And while it's always been that way, I think it's getting more and more important, and there's more and more information out there. And there's almost no end to how much we can consume. But I think that really becomes our job, that we have to become the encyclopedias of trade compliance for our companies. And as we move forward in this topsy-turvy trade world, I think data and information is going to be king, and we have to be the linchpin in our companies of ingesting that information and explaining the significance of it to everyone who we work with. And content libraries that we provide for content are really not just about tariffs. Everyone is talking tariffs, which of course are super important, but there's so much more involved in staying compliant these days, whether it's free trade agreement changes, other government agency requirements, documentation requirements. Anti-dumping cases are going to see a surge, I am sure, with all this competition regarding where you should supply from and where you should sell to. Even quotas may be making a comeback. So it's important for everyone to have a content library that is continuously up to date for all of the geographies and the commodities that their companies are dealing with. And I really think that it's becoming the point now where people used to look at the trade compliance people as being, yes, those are the people who, maybe look at tariffs and maybe look at requirements. But now everyone is saying, oh my God, tariffs, like call the trade folks now and figure out what to do. So I think our role is becoming really, really important. And again, staying informed and ingesting news from whatever source you can get, I think is becoming an even more important part of our jobs.
I would agree. I think the more information you have, the better. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think our partnership is so valuable, is being able to deliver that high frequency data to their fingertips in the systems they're already using to help them make those informed decisions is a good benefit for our 2 companies and the value that we provide. Mike, so kind of going back to you, like thinking about in terms from like a SONAR perspective. So with the volatility rising in global markets, it's become evident that real-time market data has never been more crucial. So how can companies leverage SONAR's data to make smarter logistics and sourcing decisions in these uncertain times?
Yeah, we really have data that covers a wide variety of sectors in transportation in the United States. We know a lot of the shippers on the call and carriers on the call may be interested in that ocean freight market. Really have a tremendous amount on the domestic truckload side of the business, the rail intermodal business, which I think goes beyond what the Intermodal Association of North America has, and like you said, all on a real-time basis. Really from the perspective of ocean shipping, one of the highlights is we have ocean booking data taken at the point of overseas origin. So that's a data set that a lot of domestic carriers will look at, a lot of shippers will look at, that basically shows what is expected to come into the United States in the coming weeks. And so, like, one of the Class 1 railroads uses that ocean booking data to help them understand what resources they need to have in place in the coming weeks. So they basically says that data tells them what the ocean carriers are going to tell them maybe a week or two before they hear it from the ocean carriers, gives them just a little bit more lead time. From the shipper's perspective, I think when you look at that data, it gives you some sense of, is there going to be congestion? Because we have certainly volume data, but then we also have data for like the containers that are being rejected or rolled over to subsequent vessels. You can see whether or not that's a function of just capacity coming out of the industry, or just sailings being blanked, which is a lever that a lot of the carriers have been pulling to keep capacity rational and keep rates at sort of the level that they're trying to keep them at. So there's all data for that. There's data on transit times, which that's something that has been an issue in the last year with congestion at certain ports. Last year in the middle part of the year, right around the time in May or June when we had our conference, our FreightWaves conference in Atlanta, there's all these stories about congestion, particularly at the port of Singapore, which gave rise to shortages of international containers. And that's something you can monitor on the FreightWaves website and some of the ocean data. So I think a shipper would want to be on top of all those things, and just give them a little bit more lead time in terms of making contingent arrangements when there is congestion.
Perfect. And quick question: how often the data sets that you're referring to, like the bookings data, is how often does that data set update?
Most of our data updates every day. There are some data sets that will update every week, but I think that's really an advantage of our data and SONAR data, is that it's high frequency. So it's really, for a lot of the data we're using daily data series. It's a 7-day moving average, so it gives you a sense of what's happening now.
Perfect. And then kind of piggybacking off that is, given the freight markets are experiencing high volatility, should logistics professionals rethink their procurement and capacity planning strategies to stay agile? What would your recommendation be from that perspective?
Yeah, I think they should. I think that there's a lot of geopolitical risk. I think one thing that we're seeing a lot of is big shippers wanting to have a China plus one strategy. I don't think they want their whole supply chain to be entirely dependent on China, because what you don't want is for China to invade Taiwan, and then you have a situation like when Russia invaded Ukraine, and Russia becomes persona non grata. That's kind of what you don't want to do, and have your entire supply chain dependent on China. So we are seeing more interest in countries in Southeast Asia, countries like Vietnam, et cetera, India, for manufacturing. And you're seeing cases of just redundancy built into the supplies of where companies are sourcing their ingredients or components. Like, example we can all relate to is Oreo cookies. I mean, they get a lot of their the palm oil from Indonesia and Malaysia, but they can also substitute it out with canola oil. And you're seeing more things like that, where the formulas are not just so dependent. And then you sort of relate that back to data. We can look at how often there are disruptions from those certain countries to the United States, or what the typical transit lead time is. Like that example between China and India does typically take quite a lot longer in India than in China. So that's certainly a consideration. And consideration also is just how often containers are rolled to subsequent vessels, and you see sort of the volatility over the years in those lanes to give you a sense of how you want to manage risk. So there is a lot to consider there.
That's great. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Mike. Andy, for you, so many companies struggle to align trade compliance with overall business strategy. What steps can organizations take to integrate compliance into decision-making without slowing down operations? Do you see, does trade compliance teams need to rethink that approach to risk management beyond just monitoring tariffs and updates? What's your perspective on that?
Right. So that's a really, really important question for all of us. I would say, given all that's happening today and everything that's going to happen tomorrow, really every company is starting to realize, if they haven't already, that trade compliance is one of the keys, if not the key, to their overall business strategy. There isn't a single company, I'm sure, that isn't thinking about how the current situation, on again, off again, with tariffs and surcharges and retaliatory tariffs and all of that, how that isn't going to really impact every aspect of their business, right? And if your company isn't integrating trade compliance and everything that trade compliance involves into their decision-making processes today, I think it's safe to say that you're not going to be very competitive tomorrow. I don't think anyone's really shocked, if I say that. But I really think the key to your question is, how do we do all that without slowing down operations, right? And so this leads back to an earlier discussion, which we are now really expected to have the answers or the forecast or the possibilities to these key questions that not just logistics people are now asking or supply chain people are now asking, but really everyone is asking in our company about how does what's happening affect my supply, but also my demand, right? So it's not just about sourcing and tariffs, but you have to put on the hat of your customers and you have to think, well, where are they going to buy from if there are tariffs or retaliatory tariffs? How is that all going to play into my overall business strategy? And again, stay informed, because if someone comes to you and says, hey, my customer in a certain country is thinking, maybe I'm not going to buy from you now because there might be a tariff. Well, what other options do I have? It's no longer good enough to say, let me work on that and I'll get back to you. I mean, people expect us to have the answers right now. So by staying informed and really becoming, like what I said, the encyclopedia of trade and everything that surrounds trade is becoming more and more important, because no one can wait anymore for information, right? And even though we don't know what the future is going to bring, people expect you to have some answers right now. So I think a lot of it is not just about tariffs, though, too. It's about everything around it, right? So people are talking tariffs. But it's all the stuff that surrounds that. It's the other government agency requirements. It's, do you need licenses to import and export from different countries you might not be have been looking at in the past? So I think there's so many things that you have to have almost at your fingertips to be able to give people information about, again, not just the tariff, but everything else. And again, people are focusing so much on sourcing, but it really isn't just on the supply side, it's also on the demand side. You have to put the hat of your customer on and say, what are they thinking? Right? Maybe they used to buy from my warehouse in country X, but now there's a tariff. Maybe I should set up warehouses in country Y. Oh, but if I set up a warehouse in country Y, maybe I'm going to need an export license to get the product out of that country into my customer's country. So there's so many possibilities and so many things that people haven't been thinking about before that now become crucial, and there's no time, right? I mean, everything is accelerating so quickly that we just have to, in addition to our day job, I keep saying this, we have to become like the encyclopedia, the Wikipedia, whatever you will, of global trade, and just have those answers available at all times.
Absolutely. And I think that you made some great points there. And I think that's a great resource of e2open being that resource for your customers to be able to provide that guidance and information for them. And then
we like to think so. We like to think so.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. And so Andy, kind of like layering in that is, so with economic nationalism on the rise and supply chains fragmenting, do you see foresee a shift toward more regionalized trade compliance strategies, and how should companies adopt those?
Wow. So that's certainly timely, because not only is the whole world of tariffs, being turned on its head, but the whole world of free trade agreements or regional trade agreements is also being turned on its head, like even as we speak. Right. So I think it's going to go both ways. I mean, it's going both ways in the sense that, on the one hand, there are existing trade agreements that, like USMCA is the classic one, that's going to be renegotiated, and who knows what that's going to be. Right. But even in the news now, there's a trade agreement, the Economic Community of West African States. There are several countries that are pulling out of that one. And Mercosur is looking to develop other free trade agreements. So the world of free trade agreements is changing. And even as we speak, I was just reading an article over the weekend that now a lot of Asian countries are concerned about China dumping products into their markets. So they want to form regional trade alliances without China, not just ASEAN, but other ones between them, so they can trade better among themselves and not have to worry about China. So it's not just the U.S. focus. it's a global thing, and everyone is thinking, gee, what is going to happen with trade agreement X? And is it going to expand or is it going to contract? And are new ones going to come in or not? And again, no one knows, but the ability to have that information at your fingertips to say, oh, I used to trade with this country in Africa and I got a preferential treatment because of this the Economic Community of West African States trade agreement. Now, all of a sudden I don't, like, do I still want to do business there? So, the whole world is turning upside down. And again, it's just, I'll go back to saying it, we need to stay informed and have the best answers we can for what's happening today. So I think economic regionalism is going to, some cases, increase, some cases decrease. And, if I had the answer, I'd be retired on some Pacific island right now. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it highlights the need for that high-frequency data, so you're staying informed. What happened yesterday doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen tomorrow. And so being able to have that data at your fingertips is crucial. Mike, going back to you now, intermodal and drayage disruptions are becoming more frequent here. What innovative approaches or alternative models should logistics teams explore to mitigate those potential risks?
Yeah, the intermodal and drayage disruptions were really a big deal a couple of years ago. Let's call it in the 2021 to 22 timeframe. Basically, there's a shortage of labor on the railroads. Basically, the railroads got rid of a lot of people in the early days of the pandemic, not expecting that they would have the volumes recover like they did. And unlike every other time in history, a lot of those folks weren't happy to come back and work for the railroad. So I think with the employee morale issues at the time with the railroads, fortunately, last year or so, the rail intermodal service has been better. There really hasn't been the same shortage of sort of drayage capacity, but it wouldn't surprise me if we get into a situation with continued volume growth. If there's congestion on the railroad, you could have shortages of chassis like we've seen the past few years, space at intermodal yards, delays on trains, et cetera. So there's a lot of potential for rail intermodal disruption, even though in the past year, the volumes have been really strong, both in the international side and the domestic side. A lot of the domestic intermodal companies like J.B. Hunt Hub Group have taken delivery of a tremendous number of domestic containers, and they actually have some containers stacked that so there's sort of latent capacity there. So it doesn't seem like the domestic containers are currently the constraint. But you could get into a situation where space on the train is a constraint, or just railroad congestion. It doesn't take a lot to cause congestion. It can be something like a weather event or flooding or what have you. But some of the things I've seen shippers do to sort of get to your question directly is I've seen more shippers have kind of multiple distribution centers, maybe not having all the warehousing in one location, maybe have one kind of in the southeast and one in Phoenix or something. Really kind of diversifying their ports of entry. The past few years, we've seen all that congestion at certain ports at certain times of the year. Remember all the vessels, the container ship vessels stacked up near the port of LA. So we've seen more just port diversification. The Port of Houston has been a big beneficiary of that. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with the Panama Canal. That seems to be a political football right now. So just diversifying the ports of entry, I think, is a good thing. Talked to you earlier about diversifying what ingredients you can maybe use, trying not to be too dependent on any one country for sourcing. I've seen a lot of just moving goods earlier than they need to be moved. Like, you always see that big impact right before Chinese New Year, but really saw that earlier this year than you would typically see. Some of that was also get ahead of tariffs, and just with more uncertainty with things like congestion, both at ports and potential on the railroads, is just getting those goods into the United States earlier. It's I think a more of a thought process of once you get them into the U.S., you can figure out the domestic transportation from there. Really, sort of more of the risk is just overseas, and things you just have less control over. So I've seen a lot of things there. Contingency plans in place where if there's rail intermodal issues, that you have sort of the highway option available to you. So more sort of modal options as well too. I mean, I thought one innovative approach was in the last year was the ocean to air mode, where it's kind of a hybrid between air and ocean, where you've seen some ocean freight move from Asia to, let's say, a hub like Singapore, and then use air freight from Singapore to the United States. So that's something that we started hearing a lot about last year. So you have seen some shippers take sort of creative approaches to either mitigate risk or just react to various issues.
Awesome. And so I know at SONAR we're building out the shipper consortium, which is going to help customers benchmark their entire supply chain from all modes specific, across all geographies. Does SONAR have anything today that if a customer was looking to potentially have some look at like cost savings or modal conversions, is there anything that you could point to in the SONAR database today that could help companies look at that for potential cost savings?
Yeah, on the domestic side, we have a lot of truckload data and a lot of rail intermodal data by lane. And we can show you what the likely savings is likely to be in particular lane. I mean, first, sort of taking a step back, we have intermodal volume data by container size, by lane. So if you're a shipper, let's say you've never used rail intermodal before, we can show you how much density of rail intermodal density is in those particular lanes, which gives you some sense of, is there going to be capacity? Is it just a viable option for you, which may not be obvious to someone who hasn't used rail intermodal before. And then we can also show just sort of how much of the containers moving in that particular lane that you're interested in are loaded versus empty, which gives you a indicator of, is there excess capacity in the lanes, or are there containers being repositioned in the lanes? And then we can show you the rates on the truckload side, show you like the tender rejection on the truckload side, which is a measure of how tight the truckload capacity is. And then also the rates on the intermodal side for a large number of lanes. It's not going to be for every lane because just the data is not as dense in intermodal. It's more of a niche, but we do have that in 67 lanes, and we have the corresponding truckload rates in those lanes. So we can give you a good sense of, okay, is it going to be worth your time to look for savings using rail intermodal? The slower mode usually takes about truckload plus a day, sometimes with less degree of certainty of when the goods are arrived. But we can show you sort of the nuances of whether that's a path that's worth going down.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot of things that SONAR can help. So this is one for both of you guys here is we've talked a lot about ocean shipping and kind of what could come out of these potential tariffs, the pull forwards, but what happens to the air cargo ocean shipping and warehouse markets, as well as to importers when the de minimis exemption goes away?
I can start. I think it's a big deal from my perspective. I mean, historically, so the ocean or the air rates have really been at an elevated level. And there's a few reasons for that. One of the reasons is just the belly space has been disrupted by the fact that there's less business travel than there was before the pandemic, but there's just as much, if not more, personal travel. So you have more belly space going to places like from Frankfurt. So that's kept the rates high. But what's also kept the rates high is all this stuff, the Chinese cheap, e-commerce stuff, the Shein and Temu's of the world, where Shein has this like built to order business model, and to make up for that in terms of speed, they put it on air cargo. So you basically have a category that historically would not move air cargo. Air cargo is historically high value items like your laptop, computer, your iPhone, et cetera. And now you're putting cheap goods on there, which is really tightened up the market. There's a big energy company that we interact with a lot at SONAR, and this one individual told me that he moves air cargo like all over the world, and ocean cargo all over the world, and all this e-commerce products have basically created a tightness on the air cargo market. So now if the de minimis goes away and the e-commerce companies can't take advantage of that, and they potentially change their business model where they have warehousing in the United States, I think it's going to free up capacity in the air freight market. I think it's going to have a big impact on the rates.
Awesome. Andy, you got any comments on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the de minimis question is really key in global trade compliance for sure, because on the one hand, there's the obvious piece that if it goes away and people are still shipping in low value products that up to now would just pass through, now you're going to have to go through the formal entry process. So obviously there's an increase in labor and paperwork and documentation that we never had before. So your volumes of your your heads down work goes up. But then there's also the compliance risk, because now things that used to just slip through, right? They probably never got inspected if they were, $700 or $800, whatever the threshold was. I think it was 800. And now all of a sudden things might get subject to customs inspection, and you need to be aware that things that up to this point got sent illegally, that slipped through, now all of a sudden, if you're the importer record and your name is on the paperwork and customs inspects it, and all of a sudden, instead of being crates of bananas from Colombia now contain fentanyl precursors that originated in China, you're going to be in a lot of hot water. So a lot of what's going to happen and is happening now is companies are looking for solutions to sort of figure out which shipments are more risky and which they should be more careful about. So AI comes into play there, but also just your old-fashioned sort of human brain power. If you read articles that say, hey, customs just seized the crate of, again, I'll use my banana example from Colombia, because instead of being bananas, they actually were fentanyl precursors, but you are a legitimate banana importer, you better be sure that you have inspectors along the way to make sure that no one's slipping those precursors into your bananas. Because I hear that the issue with that is that the dogs somehow, who sniff out drugs, somehow get distracted by the smell of bananas, and they don't detect the drugs. So the risk goes through the roof now that these entries and these import items are going to be inspected. So it's not just an increase in paperwork and the heads down entry work, but it's also a huge risk issue that you need to be very, very aware of. So yeah, there are a lot of downstream impacts of that de minimis going away.
Very interesting. I didn't know that about the bananas. One other thing I wanted to ask you, Andy. So we kind of talked about some of the data that we use, and we've highlighted a few tools, but just looking for you to expand on what other tools should trade compliance professionals have at their fingertips in these times, especially as change is coming at this rapid pace.
Right. So again, it's all about knowledge. So of course, a source of knowledge is the best place to start. But I also somewhat jokingly say now's the time that you wish you had paid more attention in high school algebra class, and in maybe a college class you took on how to use Excel, because you need to start running all these models of what's going to happen, just on a pure quantitative point of view, dollars and cents. What's going to happen if these tariffs go up, if these taxes increase, if these duties change, if I have this FTA? Being able to model all that in Excel, of course, is very important. But you also have to have the trade knowledge, and again, a library of content or whatever source you want to use is important to understand all the knockdown effects and to understand whether you may have a lower tariff in some place, but there may be other considerations that it's not worth pursuing it because of other issues, as I mentioned before. Maybe you need licenses or permits or documentation that just makes it too onerous. So that becomes important. I think the ability to have any way you can automate the repetitive processes. So trade compliance tools such as that we offer, really automate a lot of the busy work and free you up. I mean, there's only 24 hours in a day, no matter what you do, right? So now, as I've said earlier, you need to spend more time gaining more information, studying more, becoming the encyclopedia. You're not going to have time to do everything else. So you need to have tools to help you automate. So I think the ability to do financial modeling, the ability to have content libraries that tell you all of the impacts of switching sources or switching locations to supply demand, as well as the ability to have automation tools, they all become even more important than they've ever been.
Absolutely. No, I agree. Last one I have for you guys here, so this is one for both of you, is so looking ahead, what emerging geopolitical, technological, or environmental factors do you believe will reshape global logistics and trade compliance the most in the next 5 years? And how should organizations prepare for that?
Well, I can start with that one. I think that the constant seesaw, whiplash effect of one day this tariff, next day it's going away. One day this free trade agreement, the next day it's going away. I think all that is just becoming so challenging for all of us every day, and permeates our companies, and it's only going to get more and more challenging as time goes on. So in terms of sort of geopolitics, I mean, it's anyone's guess, but I can almost guarantee you that it's not going to get easier. It's certainly going to get more complicated. In terms of regulations, same thing. I mean, we've certainly seen over the last 20 years, I'd say that general regulatory compliance has been tightened down significantly for all types of legitimate security reasons or political reasons. But there's now really being a backlash against that. We just saw with the elections in Germany over the weekend that a lot of the reason that the center-right party came out on top was that people are really getting, I'll say, tired or disgusted with the economic situation, which a lot of people are blaming on excessive regulation, right? So there's hope that the new government there will sort of dial back some of the regulatory environments, especially for environmental things. So that's all changing. In terms of technology, of course, artificial intelligence, is on everyone's, front of mind right now. How can AI help us? I mean, there's just so much going on right now that the role that we play as trade compliance people, but as really advisors to our entire company is crucial. And whether it's environmental, regulatory, technology, geopolitical, it really all sort of funnels into our group. And like I said at the top, people are saying, call the trade folks, see what they have to say about this, because we're expected to be the experts.
Yeah, certainly I would agree with all that. I think one thing I would add is that it seems like these climate events are getting to be more problematic for companies that are sourcing certain ingredients overseas, like, just in the past few weeks, Hershey's and Mondelez have had to cut guidance. Hershey's was rather dramatic. It was like 40% drop in profitability because the cocoa is so expensive because of the difficult growing conditions in the Ivory Coast. And then, sugar prices are really high because difficult growing conditions in certain, locations. And so it needs to, hedge against some of these things to the extent they can, or find, alternate formulas and those things. So, I think that's been a big risk, is just certain ingredients that have to be grown in certain, locations, sort of even irrespective of the tariffs. And then also, I just think the consumer getting more pessimistic. It was interesting. You saw the article in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week that was like 10% of the consumers in the United States represent 50% of the consumer spending. And which is, used to be about, 1/3. The top 10% would be 1/3. Now it's about 50%. And that's a concern if that group were to just get more pessimistic. And one of the things that stood out from our webinar that Craig Fuller, our founder at FreightWaves SONAR, did last week was that, he follows all these industries that cater to affluent consumers, like private jets and yachts and those things in the media application. And he said that a lot of those industries are starting to see people pull back. So that's a big economic concern in the U.S. if the more affluent consumers start to get a little skittish. And then, the European consumers are just really under more pressure in terms of inflation than the U.S. has been, because they've had so many pressures on the energy prices, with gas getting cut off from the Russia situation. So I think just the consumer economy is in kind of a tough spot. And then, the industrial economy has been weak for some time with the higher interest rates. And it seems like the interest rates are staying higher for longer because the inflation has persisted. So I think those are concerns too.
Yes, I would agree. That was very helpful and enlightening, Mike. Thank you. Andy as well. Thank you. Those are all the questions I had. We don't have any questions from the attendees, so I did want to give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions you have now to Mike or Andy. So if you have a question that was not answered during this webinar, feel free to submit that answer in the chat box. If not, if you want to have a more one-on-one discussion, I would recommend visiting e2open.com and hitting the Contact Us button to learn more information about e2open. And if you want to learn more about SONAR, learn more what Mike was referring to with all the high-frequency data sets we have, please visit gosonar.com or reach out to bd@gosonar.com, and we'll be able to help you with those needs. And with that, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.